My name is Daniel Wallershofer. I'm the scientific director of the laboratory your genetic test was performed in, and I would like to take some time to go through your genetic test with you. So I would like to ask you to take your report, no matter if it's a hard copy or a digital copy, and then we're just going to start from page number 1. I'm going to have a digital copy of a report on my screen, and then we would just go through it step by step. And this should ensure that you understand everything correctly and that you also know how to use the report, because there's no use in knowing a lot about your genetic information if you don't know how to use this information to your benefit. All right. By the way, do take note that this might be a slightly older video by the time you're watching it, and we continue improving our reports. So there might be some differences between what I have on my screen and what you have in your booklet. So don't worry if there are some differences. I will explain the general concept, and I'm sure that you're going to understand what I'm trying to say, even if there are minor differences. And also, there are different versions of this report. So some are specifically tailored for sports studios, some are specifically tailored for use with doctors. So there might also be minor differences, but then again, this video is going to help you understand all of the aspects of the analysis. All right, so the whole thing starts with the cover letter. Here you're just going to find out some information of when the genetic sample has arrived at the laboratory, when we've performed it, and you also find my signature releasing the results for report creation. And on the next page, you just have a table of content, and then we start here. So let me enlarge this a little bit. I would really recommend that you read through this once. It's very easy to understand. I'm sure you're going to find it interesting. But let me just quickly summarize what you find in this section. The human body consists of around 50 trillion individual cells. And every one of those cells, with some minor exceptions, has a cell nucleus. And in the cell nucleus there are the human chromosomes, and these are these X shapes that you see here. And if you take a closer look at a chromosome, you find that it is in fact a very tightly wound thread. And this thread is the DNA double helix. And this is this helix structure that you see. Now, if you look at the helix in more detail, you actually see genetic letters. In reality, these are not really letters, but certain chemical structures that are there, but scientists abbreviate them in genetic letters, the A, T, G, and C. And those are the 4 different letters that our genetic code is made up of. And this is incredibly much information. For example, if I were to read out the genetic code ATGACGG in this speed of just one single cell, then it would take me 100 years to complete it. And this is just one cell, and as we've said, you have 50 trillion individual cells. So it's incredibly much information. All right, now what are genes? Genes are certain regions in this genetic code, and a gene contains an instruction. It's an instruction to your body of how to do something. For example, the lactase gene, the LCT, that's the abbreviation. This gene means that in this genetic code, there is the instruction for your body how to produce an enzyme. An enzyme is kind of a small scissors that can digest something. And this gene has the genetic information of how to build this enzyme and how to digest lactose. Lactose is a milk sugar. There's another gene, the thrombosis gene, factor 5. This just means that this gene here contains the information of how to prevent thrombosis, a blood clot from forming in your arteries when this shouldn't be the case. So there's a gene that has a certain function, and another gene has another function. And most genes mostly only have one function, some have a few, but this is pretty much how the instructions of your human body look like. And there are around 25 to 30,000 different such genes, and there are different versions of each gene. So there's a blue version of an eye color gene and a green version, and so on. And this is the general concept of how the human blueprint of how to build a body is structured. Now, the next question is, what is a genetic variation? if you were to take my factor V gene and that of any other random person, and you put them next to each other, you would find that the code is almost identical. There are only going to be very few situations, very few positions where there might be one letter change. So the genes, virtually all humans have exactly the same factor V gene, but some have one letter in one position and some people have another genetic letter. And these are the genetic variations called SNPs, single nucleotide polymorphisms. So we don't actually need to look at the whole gene because the genetic variations are usually the only part where there is a difference from one person to the next. So if we look at a certain letter here, it might be that if there's an A here, that means the gene works normally. And if there's a G, it's a kind of genetic error, then the gene has lost its function. It forgot the instruction that it should encode. So what we can do is we look at a specific genetic variation and we know if there's an A here, then you don't have an increased risk of thrombosis, and if there's a G here, then you do because the gene does not function correctly. And that's the general concept of genetics. Again, there's more information in here. If you're interested, do read through it. It's an interesting read in my opinion. So as this program is structured in such a way that you can use genetics to improve weight loss, or use genetics to eat healthy, or do both, there are different sections in the report depending on what you've ordered. So this here is a nutrition sensor part. So this is the eating healthy part to make sure your body gets the right nutrients. And this is useful for prevention, so to prevent certain metabolic problems to develop, and for treatment. So if you have certain metabolic problems, or you might even be a diabetic or something, if you mentioned that in the order form, the nutrition will be adapted to make sure you get the right nutrients that are necessary for your affliction. So it's meant to help you stay healthy and to improve your health if you already have some metabolic problems or disease problems. Now this page here is going to explain a little bit about nutrigenetics, how genes are going to influence one person differently than others. Because the general assumption that eating healthy is the same for everybody, you should eat lots of fruit and low fat and low sugar, this is just too simple, unfortunately. Because for some people, for example, milk products are a very healthy source of calcium. So for them it's good to eat milk products because they get a lot of calcium. Other people might be genetically lactose intolerant, so they can't drink milk or eat milk products. So for them this is not true, because if they eat milk products they're going to have very, very bad digestive problems. So this is just one example, one gene, and here we're testing more than 50 genes, more than 20 different metabolic problems that arise through this, and each one of them has different nutritional needs that might vary from one person to the next. And this is the concept of nutrigenetics. We test your genes, find out what your personal needs are, what you should avoid, and then we make a list of types of food where we tell you this is good for you to eat and this is bad for you to eat. And by just following, eating more of the good stuff, eating less of the bad stuff, you will do the best you can to supply your body with exactly the nutrients that it needs, and you avoid substances that it really can't work with. Okay, cardiovascular disease are very strongly influenced by genetic variations. So we're testing 18 different genetic variations in various genes, and they have an effect on a number of different things, different aspects that affect your heart health. And this here is the first analysis. I would recommend you read through this. It will give you some information about how genes are influencing your heart health. We're not going to go through this now, you can read it in your own time. And this here is the genetic result of this test. As you can see, we're testing a huge number of different genes. It's a very, very big genetic test. Now, This is again for scientists. It shows you your results, similar to a blood test where you have lots of numbers and you need a doctor to explain it to you. This is the same concept here. I'm going to quickly talk you through it, but don't worry about knowing too little about this. You don't need this table. You don't need to understand this table for you to understand the rest of the program. All right, the symbol here tells you which gene it is. So that's the ApoE gene, that's the NOS3 gene, and so on. And this, I'm going to make it a bit bigger. This is the catalog number for the genetic variation. So when you look at two genes, they are identical, virtually identical from one person to the next. And there are only small letter changes from one person to the next that we know of that are common. So some people have an A, some people have a G here. And we know that if there's an A here, the gene might be disrupted, not work correctly, and this increases your risk of disease. And if there's a G, the gene works correctly. So that's why we look at this genetic variation, and this variation has a unique identifying number, and that's this one here. This is scientific jargon, what kind of modification is from a G to a T and so on. Now, genotype is your genetic results. This basically means GG of this gene here. You have two copies, one from your father, one from your mother, and at this genetic letter, genetic variation, both copies have a G. It might also be that both copies have a genetic letter T, or one has a G and one has a T. So these are the three options, so two of one, two of the other, and one of each. And from scientific studies, again, we know that if you have two of those, then that means you have an increased risk of a certain disease, and this is what we can read out of this. Now, the OR, the odds ratio, is not relevant in this table. I'm going to explain to you what it means in the other one, so you can just ignore it here. Responder means, if it says respond, that due to these genes here, it means that you respond to something particularly well. It might be a kind of treatment, a medical treatment. It might be a lifestyle intervention that it's just better for you than it is for many other people. Protective means that these genes might protect you from a certain risk. So it's not an increased risk, but it's actually protection. In this example, there's no protection. There might be in your report, so do open yours and check it out. And risk means disease risk. So some of these cause an increased risk of some kind of disease. In this case, it might be high LDL cholesterol and high triglycerides and all of these kind of blood lipid things. And we're going to talk through this later. Now, one thing to mention, here you see a number of risks. You will very likely also have at least some genes that are going to cause a risk. And that is just because these genetic variations are very common. And pretty much everybody has some. Some people have more than the average, than the general population. They are at a higher risk. And some people have fewer than the general population and have a lower risk than everybody else. That's what it means. So you're going to have a number of risk genetic types here. And now we get to the next page, and this is where it actually gets interesting to you. This is what we could read out of the table from the previous page. So in case you didn't understand the table, don't worry about it, because this is the gist of what we could read from your genes. Now here, the risk of coronary heart disease, atherosclerosis, and heart attack. So generally, your heart health. Now you might be somewhere here in the middle. That's the average risk. That's the general population, the same risk as everybody else, you would assume. So that's just a general risk. Then you might be, like here, the arrow in the increased region, which means compared to everybody else, you have a lot more genetic variations that increase your risk. Your likelihood of developing this disease is much higher than that of everybody else. Then again, this arrow might be down here, which means you have a lower genetic risk than the general population. So it's actually protective. So depending on where you are, there are a number of nutritional interventions that you have to follow if you have a high risk of heart disease. Depending on if it's down here, then these interventions are not very important for you because your risk is very low. If it's up here, they are very important for you because you have a very high risk. So you really need to change your nutrition to counteract this risk. That's the general principle. So we always look at how big is your risk. Then we know in the background what sort of nutritional interventions are important for you. And the higher they are, the more important they are. And then we're going to factor them into your final nutrition plan. Okay, so this is your general risk. It might be lower or higher. Now the next question, your LDL cholesterol levels are likely to be. Now LDL cholesterol, that's the bad cholesterol. That's a bad cholesterol that you might have in your blood, and if you have high levels, it increases your likelihood of heart disease. So you want to have them as low as possible. Some people have a genetic predisposition to have them normal, in normal levels, which would be here. Do check what your result is. And other people might have a tendency to have it increased, like in this case. This just tells you if your genes work against you to keep a normal level of the bad cholesterol. The next question, the HDL cholesterol, that's the good cholesterol. This should be as high as possible. And some people have a genetic tendency to have normal levels, which would be the arrow here, and other people have the tendency to have particularly low levels, which is when it would be here, in which case certain nutritional interventions would be necessary again to improve it. Now, if you go to your doctor and your doctor sees that you have bad HDL cholesterol, chances are that he would recommend omega-3 fatty acids. These are these soft gels with fish oil in them. And some people do, when they take them, do experience a HDL cholesterol improving effect of them. However, the effect of omega-3 fatty acids is controversial because some studies have shown yes they work and others have said maybe not. And scientists looked into it and they found out what the reason, or at least what one of the reasons was why the results were so controversial. Because omega-3 fatty acids only improve your HDL cholesterol if you have a certain genetic variant. That's the ApoA1 variant. If you don't have this, it makes it worse. So it's counterproductive. So my doctor would explain to me I need to take omega-3 fatty acids because my HDL cholesterol is bad. I do it, I take it regularly, and it gets even worse. That's actually my personal genetic results. So omega-3 fatty acids are going to make my HDL cholesterol worse, but it might be beneficial for others. Now, omega-3 fatty acids are, for one thing, in sea fish. For another thing, they are in nutritional supplements, of course. So eating fish, everybody says it's healthy. For some people, yes. For some people, it might even be unhealthy for the HDL cholesterol. So we look at this results, the result that you have in front of you now, and then we decide, okay, anything that contains omega-3 fatty acids, is this a good idea or a bad idea concerning your HDL cholesterol? That's the basic principle of this genetic test. So we're already looking at a lot of different factors that factor into if a specific type of food is good or bad for you. The next thing, triglyceride levels. It's kind of like cholesterol. You want to have low levels to be healthy. Some people have a tendency to have an increased amount. Again, nutritional intervention has a good chance of improving this. Then, next question, homocysteine levels. This is actually an amino acid. It's not a fat. However, it acts just like cholesterol. Having high levels of homocysteine is bad for your heart health. It increases your risk of heart disease. And some people have normal levels of homocysteine and others have a genetic tendency to have increased levels. It doesn't mean that they must have increased homocysteine levels when you do a blood test. It just means that they tend to have a higher likelihood to have increased homocysteine, and we can counteract this because studies have shown that folic acid or folate as well as vitamin B6 and vitamin B12 are very good in lowering homocysteine levels. So what we can do if we know that you have an increased risk of homocysteine, we are going to find out which type of food contain a lot of folic acid and a lot of vitamin B6 and B12, and we recommend them more. And by adding these are going to lower your homocysteine levels by modifying your nutrition, improving your nutrition, and we can counteract your genetic tendency. If you are, however, in the green area, that's not so important. So other types of food might be recommended instead of folate or vitamin B6 and B12. Now, vitamin B2 is a similar case to omega-3. Some scientific studies have shown it improves the homocysteine levels if you eat more vitamin B2, and others have shown it doesn't. Again, we found that there's a genetic variation that modifies the effect of vitamin B2 on your genes, on your homocysteine levels. So we tested your genes, and you can check your own results. If you're here, that means you have the genetic variation that it's good for homocysteine, and if you're just like in this example here, it means vitamin B2 is not going to improve homocysteine levels. So again, depending on how important homocysteine regulation is and whether vitamin B2 is good or bad for you, we decided on every single type of food if this is good or bad for you. And we recommend what is particularly important for you. Now, this here is just a general information that we could get from your genes. It has nothing to do with nutrition in this case. Aspirin is a headache pill, and it was found to also have anti-thrombosis action. So people taking aspirin have a lower risk of forming blood clots, which then can cause a heart attack or stroke. For most people, this is the case, this works. Some people have no effect. So in this case, you can check your own results, but this person does not benefit from aspirin as prevention from thrombosis. While if you're here, it might be a good idea to take it in risk situations, such as long flights where you're sitting still for 10 hours and so on. So this is just some information for you if aspirin is going to be beneficial. It's also important because some people, older people with higher risk of thrombosis, are getting aspirin as prevention, but due to their genetics, because they're not taking the genetics, it has no effect. So really they're taking it for nothing, except for maybe the odd headache, but it really wouldn't help, doesn't help them in their prevention. And then the risk of sudden cardiac death to do with the QT interval. Now, I'm sure you've seen in these doctor series when somebody's an electrocardiogram, you see this line and then it goes up and down and then it goes straight again, and if the person dies then it goes beep beep. And this shape that goes up and down, this is basically the blueprint or the map of the heartbeat. And a certain interval, a certain phase in this can be longer in some people due to a genetic variation. So a longer, and this interval, this region is called the QT interval. It just means the heartbeat is slower in some part of the heartbeat. And if you have a slower QT interval, you have a higher risk of sudden cardiac death, which is basically a heart attack. Now there are some certain drugs which can also make this longer. So if you have an increased risk here, you already tend to have a longer QT interval. If you then also take a drug that makes it longer, it increases your risk of a heart attack if you're taking this drug. Again, this has nothing to do with nutrition. This is just something for you to check out. If you're here in a normal range, it means no problem. If you're here, you should talk to your doctor about your tendency to have a prolonged QT interval, and he should check if any drugs that you're taking might also have this effect, and then keep an eye on it. Alright, so this is everything to do with cardiovascular health. So you've seen from these 18 genetic tests that we've done, there are a number of different risks that require different nutritional interventions, like omega-3 or low fat or vitamin B12, B6, folate, and so on. And depending on the different genetic risks, we can say this is more important, this is less important, and we factor everything into your final food list. And the next thing is hypertension. This is basically high blood pressure. Again, some background information you can look into. Here we're testing 3 genes. And here Now we come to the odds ratio. Again, this is the gene, this is the catalog number of the genetic variation, this is your genetic result. And here we see the odds ratio. And you see here an odds ratio of 1.9. This means it's a 1.9-fold risk compared to a person with other genes. So if you have the gene CC, it means you have a 1.9, so almost 2-fold higher risk of suffering from this disease, hypertension, than a person with other genes. So odds ratio is really a relative risk. The higher the number, the worse, and the more of these numbers that are higher than 1 is also bad. If you have an odds ratio of 1, it's a 1-fold risk, that's a normal risk. So really any number that's higher is bad for your health or a risk for your health. So we tested this. In this case, only one of the 3 genes has a risk. The other ones are okay. It's likely a different result for you. And again, this is scientific. You don't really need to look into this. This is what's important for you. Here you see a scale, your risk of hypertension based on your genetics. It might be normal, so quite low, or very high. And again, there are nutritional interventions against hypertension. The most important being sodium. That's table salt. If you have high blood pressure or if you're genetically predisposed to high blood pressure, sodium, a lot of table salt is bad for you. So what we're doing is we look at this and we say if you're here in the red area, do check if that's your result. Anything that contains a lot of sodium is going to be bad for you, so we're not going to recommend it. And if you're down here, then sodium is not so much of an issue and it can be recommended at higher dosages. So again, we check your genes and we find out what ingredients are going to be good or bad. Now, detoxification is an interesting concept. Basically, there are a number of different toxins, toxic chemicals and stuff in our environment that can reach our body, that can get into our body. And nature knows about this. So we have a number of systems, a number of genes that can recognize these toxins, neutralize them and remove them from the body. And as you can guess, it's genes that are doing this, that are regulating this. And some people have variations in some of these genes, which means that they cannot neutralize some of the toxins, while other people can. So there are big differences in how people respond to certain toxic chemicals and stuff. All right, let's look at your results. So again, on this page, you will find some general information. Do read through it. And here is phase 1 detoxification. And this is all about ash, soot, smoke and burnt things. So as you know, smoking increases your risk of lung cancer. That is because some of these smoke contents are carcinogenic. They're cancer causing. And they reach our body, and then a certain enzyme system, genes, indirectly genes recognize them, these toxins, these carcinogens, they neutralize them and remove them. So we have a protection from this cancer-causing substance that reaches our body. So these 2 genes here are responsible for this detoxification. So I smoke a cigarette, the toxin gets into my body, these 2 genes recognize the toxin and neutralizes it and prevents it from giving me cancer. In this case, both of the genes have a high odds ratio, meaning that they are defective and they increase the risk. So we have 2 genes that give me a risk. This one 2.4-fold and 3.4-fold. So we have around 5 to 6-fold higher risk of bad health effects from these toxins that are present in smoke, in ash, in burnt food and so on. So barbecued food also is much more of a problem for a person with this result because you see here the phase 1 detoxification is very ineffective. And it might also be very effective, so in this case it's not so much of a problem. It still doesn't mean you should smoke. It's still dangerous, still likely to significantly shorten your lifespan, but for this person it's 5 to 6 times worse, more problematic than for many other people. So in case you are a smoker, and I hope you're not, in case you're a smoker and you're here in this area, then you really should reconsider your habits, because it's 5 times more dangerous, more problematic for you than for many other people. So it's much more much more dangerous for your health than it might be for many others. This also explains why sometimes some people smoke for 5 years and develop lung cancer, and others smoke until they're 80 years old and never develop lung cancer, just because their bodies respond differently to these cancer-causing substances. Alright, so do check your own results. If you're here, it means barbecued food is generally, it's not very healthy, but it's not so much of a problem if you have some charred or blackened parts of the meat. You shouldn't eat burnt food anyhow. However, if you're here, it's a lot less healthy for you, and you should really try to cook food in such a way that it's not getting charred or black. So this is the first step. This just tells you barbecue concept, yes or no. The second phase 2 detoxifications, is a lot more interesting. I'm sure you're aware of this trend of organic food, meaning that the food was grown without any chemicals, without pesticides, herbicides, and so on. Now, some people say this is very healthy because all of these chemicals are unhealthy for you. Other people say they don't matter, they've been tested, they are not dangerous. And in a way, both of them are right, because phase 2 detoxification, and let me zoom in here, these 3 genes are responsible for phase 2 detoxification. And this means if I eat some vegetables that have a lot of herbicides in them, then the vegetables are going to contain these substances. They're going to reach my body. And then there are these 3 genes which produce enzymes which recognize it, neutralize it, and remove it. So it's not a problem. Same goes for industrial solvents and things like that. For other people, however, they might not have some of these genes active. And in this case, the herbicide reaches the body, it's not recognized, it's not removed, and it can do its damage. So for some people, absolutely it is a problem because they cannot neutralize the toxins that reach the body. For other people, it's less of a problem. It's probably still not healthy, but it's definitely not such a big health risk and health issue than for other people. Now, let me just quickly talk you through the results here. Here we see null allele, which you might be interested in. You see here we have a catalog number, the RS number for the genetic variation, where 1 letter change is happening. But here the null allele is something different. We don't know why, but some people don't just have a genetic variation that breaks the gene, but they actually miss the whole gene. The whole gene is gone. And that is called a null allele. Allele being 1 copy of a gene. So you can have 2 missing copies of the gene, you can have 1 copy and 1 missing copy, or you can have 2 copies of it. And in this case, this is the optimal genetic result. Do check what your result is. And you see here the effectiveness of phase 2 detoxification is very effective. It might also be very ineffective or somewhere in between. Now, if you're in the effective area, then organic food might still be a good idea. But it's not going to be so critical for you. If you're here, I would really make sure that I eat organically. Try to avoid any kind of substances, fertilizers that might contain substances that could harm your body. Now, the same goes for heavy metals. Lead, for example, is a heavy metal that's very unhealthy. Some people get heavy lead detoxification. And the same goes for cadmium and mercury. And these substances, for one thing, accumulate in some certain types of food, like shellfish. Shellfish are filter feeders, they filter water through, and they accumulate high levels of toxic heavy metals. Now, it's not a problem for many people because the genes recognize them and remove the heavy metals. For other people, they can't remove them. They might accumulate in the body and start damaging the person's health. So depending on your results here, we're going to see if shellfish or fish, generally fish grown in fish farms in the sea, are also more polluted with heavy metals. These might be less recommended to you based on your detoxification capacity, while it might be very healthy for other people. So just for fish, we already have two things now. So omega-3 content, good or not, and also the content of pollutants that are common in these fish. All right, so do check your results. Ineffective means more organic food, less fish, less shellfish, and here all of this is not so much of a problem. Okay, so that's phase 2 detoxification. Then we have oxidative stress, and you will likely have heard of this before. Oxidative stress is a byproduct of converting energy in our body. When we use oxygen, we need oxygen to convert energy and do something with it, run our body. And the byproducts of this metabolism are free radicals, and they are kind of small toxic molecules that are created, and they then grab onto something and break it, and this grabs onto something else and breaks it, and this grabs onto something else. So it's a sort of chain reaction of damage until an antioxidant, it's a free radical inhibitor or a free radical catcher, you could say, comes along and grabs it and stops this chain reaction. And this happens throughout our body in many different ways. There are lots of different types of free radicals, and they damage our tissue. And they have something to do with aging of the skin and just getting older. They are one of the main parts that are involved in this. So free radicals, they continuously are produced, and they damage the tissues, and eventually the damage accumulates and the skin begins to sag, and you become more prone to disease. Now, since nature knew that this genetic variation is so dangerous, that these free radicals are so detrimental to health, we have a number of safeguards, and these genes here have these roles. So these genes protect us in different ways from these free radical inhibitors, from these free radicals. All right, so you can read through this, as we'll explain it in a bit more detail. And now let's look at the scale bars, which is the important thing. So generally, your oxidative stress, how well you are protected from these age-promoting free radicals. Normal means good protection, your genes are working, they're protecting you. Increased means your genes, at least some, if not all of the genes, are disabled through some of the genetic variations, and you don't have the protection that other people would have from these free radicals. Then the recommended dose of antioxidants. I said these free radicals do their damage until an antioxidant, a radical inhibitor, comes along and grabs onto it and neutralizes it. Now, these antioxidants, free radical inhibitors, are vitamin C, vitamin E, vitamin A, alpha-lipoic acid, and some other substances. So many of the typical vitamins that you've heard about, that they're healthy, some of their roles are to neutralize free radicals. So on the one hand, you have genes that might protect you, but they might be broken. And on the other hand, you have these vitamins that can protect you. And if the genes are broken, you're going to need more vitamins to counteract this lacking protection. And that's the basic concept. We test your stress, how good your genes are. If they're good, you need a few vitamins. If they're bad, because they're all broken, you lack this protection. And then we're going to get different types of food that contain a lot of these vitamins, and we're going to recommend them more to you in your nutrition plan, because the containing antioxidants, the vitamins, are very important for you to remain healthy. So again, your genes tell us how important some substances in some foods are for you. All right, the next question, coenzyme Q10 and ubiquinol. This is a very interesting story. If you're into skin creams, you might have realized that some skin creams use coenzyme Q10 as a component, because coenzyme Q10 has the potential to be converted to ubiquinol. So coenzyme Q10 is not active, but ubiquinol, the active form, can neutralize free radicals and slow aging. That's the concept. And that's why it's in skin cream and in all sorts of beauty products. Some people also take it as a nutritional supplement, so a gelatin or a pill, and it's swallowed. it reaches the body, it's converted to ubiquinol and protects you from oxidative stress. However, as I said, you need to convert it because Q10 by itself is not active. And there is a gene that produces an enzyme, scissors kind of, that recognize Q10, modify it, and then you get ubiquinol. And this ubiquinol is inactive. So Q10 itself is inactive. And you might have guessed it, there is a genetic variation that disables the enzyme. So what happens is I take Q10, it reaches my body, there are no seizures, no enzymes modifying it, there's no action. And I take it every day because I want a lot of protection from oxidative stress, and it's a very expensive supplement as well. And instead of benefiting from it, I lack this function, and it's not active in me. So there are two ways of what you can do in this case. You can either already take the activated form, ubiquinol, or you can counteract it with all of the other antioxidants, vitamin C, E, A, and all of these substances. So if you take more of them, you can partly balance out that you're lacking this function. So here you're going to find out if your body is able to activate coenzyme Q10 to ubiquinol. If it's possible, coenzyme Q10 is going to be active in you, it's going to help you. If it's here, then it's useless. Then some of you will now probably find out that you've taken coenzyme Q10 for years and you cannot process it, and it will result in nothing. And here you see the recommended antioxidant substance, coenzyme Q10 or alternative vitamins, depending on where you are. And again, we can take this information, we find out you need more vitamins or not, and then we choose which type of food to recommend to you. And then selenium, that's also a very interesting story. Selenium is a trace element that is contained within food. And there is a gene, the GPX1 gene. Actually, let me scroll up here and show you this gene. The GPX1 gene is this one here. This gene protects you from free radicals as well. And it works like this. The gene has instructions for an enzyme that has a function to float around and grab onto free radicals and neutralize them. However, for this enzyme to work, it needs selenium. Selenium is an integral part of how to build this thing, one of the building blocks. So, if a person is selenium deficient, has too little selenium through poor nutrition, they are going to produce the enzyme, but it's not going to work. And only some of them will work, and the function of this protective enzyme is very low. That is why it's unhealthy to be selenium deficient, one of the reasons. If you then increase the amount of selenium through healthy nutrition or maybe supplements with selenium, you can recover this function, because the new enzymes that are being built correctly, and they can do this function, and they protect you from these free radicals. Now, there is a genetic variation that's not uncommon that messed up the building instruction for this enzyme. So it's still building it kind of correctly, but it's slightly modified. So it grabs onto free radicals less efficiently. So even with normal selenium status, this doesn't work very well. So you have a lower protection from free radicals because of this genetic variation. And now the interesting thing is, scientific studies have found out if you increase the amount of selenium to far above normal levels, you can rescue the function of many of these, and then you can increase the protection again. So, and this is a very interesting point. Some people say, why do you do a genetic test to find out how much selenium a person needs? Why not do a blood test? Check out if they are in a healthy range. If yes, fine. If not, give them more selenium. But that's exactly the point. If the gene works normally, which you can only test through genetics, the normal range is okay. But if the gene has the genetic variation, you need much more, so much higher than the normal range, to achieve the same result. So through genetics, we know you should be in the high range and you should be in the low range, while a blood test would say this is the healthy range, which we try to put everyone into, and we try to adjust everyone to be in the healthy range. So really there are some things which blood tests can do, which genetics can't, like see if there's a deficiency. Genetics has no chance of doing this, but genetics has the option of finding out how much you should really have, because not everybody's requirement is the same as we see in this gene. So by looking at this gene, we know your requirement of selenium. If it's increased, like in this example, it means your genes are modified, it's less effective, and you can rescue some of the function with more selenium. And if you're here in the normal range, the normal amount of selenium is completely sufficient for you. So again, what we do is we look at this, we find out if how high your requirement of selenium is, and then we evaluate every one of the 1,000 different types of food, and we can find out this has a lot of selenium, you need a lot of selenium, so we're going to recommend this type of food more. That's the concept of oxidative stress. Now, diabetes mellitus type 2. This is age diabetes. It's basically blood sugar levels that are getting out of control. Again, here's some background information, do read through it, and here are the genes that are involved in it. Again, very technical, not necessary for you to understand. This is your genetic result. It's going to stay the same for the rest of your life, so no need to test that ever again. And here's the odds ratio, the relative risk of developing a disease. So due to this genetic type, CC, you have a relative risk of 1. So no increased risk of developing the disease, a one-fold risk, which is a normal risk. Next gene, AA, means a one-fold risk, no problem. Let's skip over this for one moment. Here, you have an increased risk, so a 1.65-fold risk. So 65% higher likelihood of developing diabetes than a person with the other type of gene. Here it's a 38% higher risk. So each one of them separately is evaluated here. And here, the interleukin-6 gene has a 0.91 odds ratio, which means the risk of developing the disease is less than a one-fold risk. It's a 0.91-fold risk. So it's a lower risk. In other words, it's protection. That's why you see protection here. So it's protective. So this is lowering your risk in case you have the same genetic result, while others are increasing it. Now, looking at a single gene has a problem. If you just look at this gene, you would say, okay, no increased risk, which is true by just considering this one gene, but there are other genes playing a role. So what we do is we look at all of them together, we combine the genetic risks, calculate what the final results are for you, and this is what we find in the scale bars here. So just like in the heart disease section, this is the interesting part. If your arrow is here, you have the average risk of developing diabetes, the same as everybody else. If your arrow is down here, like in this case, you're protected. You have a lower risk than everybody else, so diabetes intervention through nutrition is less important for you here and more important for you here. One example is, for example, as you know, diabetes is too much sugar in your blood, and there is something called a glycemic index. Now, glycemic index means if I eat something with carbohydrates, with sugars, and it has a high glycemic index, it means the sugar is likely very small pieces. It goes into the bloodstream very quickly, and the blood sugar levels spike, go up very quickly. Now, this is bad for people with bad regulation of blood sugar, like people with a high risk. So, people with a high risk of diabetes or diabetics should not eat something with a high glycemic index because it spikes their blood sugar levels. They should eat something with a low glycemic index, which is things that long sugars, they first need to be laboriously cut up into smaller pieces, and they go into the bloodstream and only increase the blood glucose level very slowly. So this is more important for people with the disease or with higher risk. So here we find out, in this case, it's not very important to consider. In this case, it's very important. Then, in some people, if they develop the disease, it progresses faster. And insulin is kind of like the last stage of treatment. First you try it with drugs. If that doesn't work, then you begin with insulin. And some people just progress faster and then they need insulin earlier, which is here, and normal is here. So you can check your results. If you're not suffering from diabetes then, and you're here in this area, then do make sure that you stay healthy, because for you the progression is much faster than for other people. This should be important for you to follow prevention. Then there are different types of drugs which act differently in different people. And there are 4 drugs: glibenclamide, tolbutamide, glimepiride, and metformin. And these 4 are commonly prescribed as treatment for early stages of diabetes. And of course, effective treatment is important for you to get the best possible health benefit. And a doctor would usually say, oh, I've had good experiences with this drug, let's try this. If it doesn't work, he may switch to another drug. And we can save you some of this trial and error, because now you know that glibenclamide might be very effective if your arrow is here to check your result, or ineffective. Tolbutamide might be more effective or ineffective, and so on. So you see which kind of drug is likely to be more effective or less effective. It doesn't mean that the wrong drug is not going to work, it just means it's going to work worse or less well than it would for people with other genes. So it's a good idea to find out which one is the best effective drug and try that one first, if you ever develop diabetes. But of course, through diet intervention and a healthy lifestyle, the aim is to prevent this from happening. So again, we find out the risk, we find out how important the diabetes intervention food recommendations are, and we factor them into the different types of food. Now for Alzheimer's disease, this is that's age dementia. This is a very strongly genetically influenced disease, and people say it's not treatable. So some people put a question mark over whether it's a good idea to do this test. And in a way they're right, because when you have full-blown Alzheimer's disease, then there are very few treatments that have shown to be effective. However, there's a lot of research going into it, so I don't think this will be the case for much longer. However, at the moment, it still is true that full-blown Alzheimer's disease is difficult to treat. However, what we have found is that there are a number of lifestyle interventions that have shown to either lower the risk of Alzheimer's disease from occurring or delay the onset. And if you think about it, Alzheimer's disease usually happens at the latest stages of life. And if you can delay it by 5 or 10 years, it's already completely sufficient, because you're going to die of old age long before you're going to have problems with Alzheimer's disease. So while yes, it's untreatable, there are a number of things that you can do, nutrition being one very important fact, but some other factors as well that you can follow to reduce your risk, likelihood of developing, even if your genes say you have a high risk, and to delay the onset. Okay, again, here is some background information, and here is the gene that is responsible for it. It's the ApoE gene, and it's a little more complicated in this aspect because we convert the genetic types into ApoE types, and there are 3 different types. If you have a T on one gene and a G here, then it's a type E3 and so on. So don't worry about this. This is a little complicated, but what is important for you is this bar here. The average risk is the general population risk. You can have a protective effect due to genes, and here's an odds ratio of 0.7, so 30% lower risk than that of the general population. Do check what your results is. Mine is 3.2, so I'm up here. So 0.7 down here, meaning that the risk that this person develops Alzheimer's disease is a lot lower. So food intervention to prevent Alzheimer's disease is less important for this person than it might be for me. I need a lot of antioxidants because they have been found to be beneficial for prevention. All right, and as I said, you might also have a very high risk of the disease, in which case the recommendations for healthy eating of Alzheimer's disease would be preferred. And depending on your risk, you will also see the amount of antioxidants that you will require. Free radicals are part of the damage that is done to the brain, so more antioxidants are required if your risk is higher. And this is your general risk, and this factors into your food list and gives you the best chances to avoid developing the disease through the right nutrition. And hemochromatosis is a disease whereby a genetic variation causes your body to absorb too much iron from food. So you eat food and the body grabs too much iron, and the body doesn't have any way of secreting iron again. So what happens is the amount of iron goes up and up and up, and it starts to damage your joints. So you first get joint problems, then eventually the immune system is reduced, you get diabetes, and all the way to liver damage, and you might even die. So this is a quite severe disease. It's also quite common, and it's caused by a genetic variation. And this means that, here you can read up on it, this disease is one gene, and there are 3 different genetic variations that might occur that cause this disease. And if you have a higher risk, then your risk of hemochromatosis would be higher here. So you would have an arrow here, which would mean that you should avoid food that has a lot of iron. It also means you should, as prevention, and that's a very nice way of doing genetic prevention, disease prevention. If you're here, go to 4 to 6 times per year to blood donations, because blood contains a lot of iron. Hemoglobin, that's red stuff in the blood, needs a lot of iron. So if you remove blood from your body needs to produce new blood, and it uses up some of the iron that's available. So if you go to blood donation 4 to 6 times a year, then this is going to improve or help you keep your iron levels in the normal range so you don't develop the disease. And you should also reduce any type of food that contains a lot of iron. Other people, usually young girls, many young girls have the problem of iron deficiency, which is kind of the opposite of this. They have too little iron. They are recommended to eat low-fat red meat because it has a lot of iron, while people that are here in this area should not particularly eat more iron. So again, depending on where you are, we're going to adapt your nutrition. If you absorb too much iron, then we're not going to recommend high iron foods. We're going to recommend low iron foods to you. And then osteoporosis. That's brittle bone disease. Again, read up on it, it's interesting. Here are the 4 different genes involved in it. Now, in this case, we have an odds ratio of 1 for one gene, an odds ratio of 0.61, so it's protective, it's lower than a 1-fold risk, 39% lower risk, and again, an odds ratio of 1. So this is a very beneficial type of genetic result. The LCT gene I'm going to talk about in a minute, so let's skip that for a moment. So here we've got a very good genetic basis, and then we go to the next page, and you see here that you don't have an increased risk of osteoporosis. It might, however, be significantly higher. And osteoporosis, as you know, is brittle bone disease. It means that you need a lot of calcium and a lot of vitamin D because they improve the strength of your bone. And if you're calcium or vitamin D deficient, then your bones become weaker. So in case you have an increased risk, a high risk of osteoporosis here, we would recommend more types of food that contain a lot of calcium and vitamin D, because that's important for you to maintain your strong bones. We would also discourage you from eating food that has a lot of phosphate, because phosphates in chocolate, sausages, and meat stuff, phosphates tend to extract calcium from bones. So eating a lot of phosphates is bad for bones, eating a lot of calcium is good for bones. The same goes for cysteine and methionine. These are 2 amino acids, and they tend to be bad for bone health. And caffeine is also not so good. So you should not eat too much caffeine in this case. So depending on how high your risk is, the more strongly these factors come into the recommendation what type of food you should eat. Then another thing is when you go to your doctor and he sees that you have a reduced bone mineral density, there are a number of drugs, and one of them is bisphosphonate. And if here you can see what the likely response of your body is. For some people, this drug responds quite well. For others, it responds less well. And then the next thing, the capacity to absorb calcium. And now I need to go back here. Because this LCT gene that I've told you about before, this is the one that doesn't actually have a direct link to osteoporosis, but it is the one that causes lactose intolerance. So some people, due to this gene, this genetic variation, cannot drink milk without getting severe side effects. So what we've done here is we tested this gene, and in this case it's okay. If you have a CC here, and we're going to talk about this again later, do check your own results. If you have a CC here, it means you're genetically predisposed to be lactose intolerant. It does not mean you are already lactose intolerant, but it means that there's a very high likelihood that during the course of your life you are going to develop bad reactions to milk, sugar, lactose. So no need to stop eating lactose containing stuff, but do keep an eye out, because usually it takes a person 5 years to get the right diagnosis. And you can skip that by looking out for symptoms. So this person has a TT, and studies have shown that people with the TT genotype that are not lactose intolerant eat a lot more calcium than people with the CC genotype that are prone to become lactose intolerant, because simply there's a lot of calcium in milk products. So what you see here is your capacity to absorb or ingest calcium, and it might be normal or it might be reduced. Now if it's reduced, it means we need calcium sources to make sure you're not deficient. So anything that contains calcium is good. It will be recommended to you more. However, anything that contains lactose will have a warning sign that warning, you can eat it. However, do look out if you ever develop a bad reaction. It might be lactose intolerance. Go talk to your doctor. Normal means no intervention necessary. So again, this feeds into the recommendations. Then rheumatoid arthritis. Again, you can read up on it. It's a disease where your immune system attacks the cartilage between your bones, the sort of lubrication between your bones. And the immune system in this case is too aggressive. It digests the bones, the cartilage, and the bones start to, in very severe cases, rub against each other. The joints start to look crooked and they lose their function. So it can be a very painful and very uncomfortable disease. And there are certain genes which modulate how aggressive the immune system is. And for some people with genetic variations, it's just very aggressive. For others, it's not. So some people have a very high likelihood of developing inflammatory joint diseases, such as rheumatoid arthritis, and others do not. So looking at this, these are the two genes. This person doesn't have an increased odds ratio. You can check if you have a higher number here, your risk is higher. And then on this scale, you're going to have a normal risk up to very high risk. You can check where you are. Now it gets a little more complicated. I have told you that the HDL cholesterol, the first disease that we looked at, the HDL cholesterol can be sometimes improved through omega-3 fatty acids, and sometimes it can become worse, depending on the genes. For me, it's worse. And here, omega-3 fatty acids also have an effect, because omega-3 fatty acids make an immune system less aggressive. So, irrespective of what it does to the cholesterol, a lot of omega-3 fatty acids are going to help you make your immune system less aggressive and reduce the likelihood or the progression of rheumatoid arthritis. So now we've got the problem. In my case, for example, I have a high risk of rheumatoid arthritis, and for me, omega-3 makes my HDL cholesterol worse. So what should I do? Should I take it because it's good here, or should I avoid it because it's actually bad for something else? And this is what we then do. We look at how important is this. If I have a very high risk here and only a small risk here, then this is more important. Let's do it, even if it makes this a little worse. If this is the biggest problem from the genetic risk and my risk of rheumatoid arthritis is very minimal, then it's not a good idea. So really saying omega-3 is good for you is just too simple. It's just yes for some things, no for other things, yes for some people, no for other people. Just saying omega-3 fatty acids are healthy is just an oversimplification. So you don't need to worry about this. We looked at the different aspects and we then decided if it's a good idea or not to recommend more omega-3 containing foods to you or not. Then gluten intolerance. Gluten is a wheat protein. It's a protein, there's a gene producing a protein in wheat, in lots of different types of cereal. And again, here's some information behind it. And what is interesting is that 99.9% of all people developing this intolerance, this wheat intolerance, they can't eat cereal stuff and bread and so on, 99% of them have a certain genetic variation. So there is a genetic variation that you need to have to be able to develop the disease. However, there are many people that have this genetic variation that never become gluten intolerant. So what you need to consider here, if you have an increased risk and you're down here somewhere, that means you have the genetic requirement for you to become gluten intolerant, but it's up to chance, as far as we know, if you're going to develop the disease or not. If you're down here, the chances are very, very low that you are going to develop this disease, almost zero. So if you are in the increased area, as I said, it doesn't mean you are gluten intolerant. Depending on the different types, it might be up to 40% likelihood that you are going to develop the disease. But again, 40%, that's more likely not than it is that you're developing the disease. So this is what we call a negative predictive value. With gluten intolerance, it usually takes 11 years on average for a person from the first symptoms to finally get the diagnosis and the treatment, gluten-free diet. And the problem is, out of these, the people that are not getting this treatment, 12% have fatal consequences. So all sorts of cancer risks are increased if they continue eating gluten. And of course, it's a very, very uncomfortable problem if you continuously have inflamed intestines, because the immune system thinks gluten is a bacteria and it starts to fight it. Every time you eat it, your whole intestine inflames and it's getting damaged and everything. So it's a very uncomfortable thing. So in order to spare you the problem of 11 years on average, so for some people it's even longer, of 11 years of digestive problems and potentially fatal consequences, you should be aware that in here you are part of the risk group. So you can still eat gluten-containing food, however, you should look out for symptoms. And if you realize, oh, I keep having problems, digestive problems if I eat certain things, but I can't quite pinpoint what it is, then remember that you are the risk group of gluten intolerance. And then you can have an antibody test and get the right diagnosis. So save yourself the 11 years. If you're here, keep looking out for it. Maybe you'll never develop it, then everything's fine. That's what I wish that would happen for you. And if it develops, you're going to immediately get the right diagnosis. And then we have the food list and we have a warning sign that will tell you, attention, this food might contain gluten. So the list will help you to avoid the types of food that might cause problems for you. There's some cereal types that don't contain gluten, for example. So you don't need to stop eating every possible type of bread. You just need to adapt your nutrition. Okay, lactose intolerance we've already spoken about. So again, you can read up on it. Here, this is the one gene. Your risk of lactose intolerance is very low or might be very high. This is a very common food intolerance, by the way. 20%, one in five people of the European population is lactose intolerant. They have a genetic variation that do not allow them to drink milk in adulthood. One important aspect, this is something that only develops earliest after the age of 5. So if a baby has lactose intolerance, it's not this. And if a lactose intolerance test, this test is done on a baby or a child of age of 3, it's much too soon to know about, to have any effect in it. Because most people, virtually all people, are lactose tolerant as babies, and the ones that are lactose intolerant then develop it later in life. And they have a certain genetic variation that we're testing here. So if I have a CC here, chances are, or likely, you were lactose tolerant as a baby. And at some point in your life, maybe already, maybe in 3 years, maybe in 10 years, you are likely to produce negative symptoms when eating lactose. So there's no need to avoid lactose-containing foods if you don't have problems, if you don't have digestive problems. You can keep eating them. Again, in the food list, you're going to have a warning sign that says, be careful, this might contain lactose. If so, look out for it if you get digestive problems. If yes, then avoid everything with lactose in it. If not, continue eating it. It doesn't influence the likelihood of developing it later. So your risk of lactose intolerance is low. If it is high, you get a warning in the food list. It will help you adapt your nutrition. And the amount of calcium is also normal. It might be reduced if you are genetically lactose intolerant. So also this factors into the selection of the different types of food. Macular degeneration is an eye disease, and basically, if you don't know about it, there's some information about it. It starts affecting your vision right at the point where you look. So if you want to read, there a sort of annoying blob appears. You can still see all around, but you can't see where exactly where you're looking. And this is a disease that is influenced by a number of genes. So in this case, 2 genes are okay, but one of them increases the risk 2.7-fold. So the risk is higher. And again, do check your own results. You might be normal, so low risk of this eye disease. It might be very high or somewhere in between. And antioxidants have been found to be beneficial in the prevention as well as in slowing the progression of the disease. So again, looking at how high your risk is of developing the disease, we find out how many antioxidants you need, and if you need a lot of them for prevention, then we would recommend certain types of food that contain a lot of antioxidants. If the risk is low, that's less important. All right, so by testing more than 50 genes, we now know the different tendencies that you have, different metabolic problems that might occur from these genetic variations, and we know what sort of substances in food might be beneficial for your health, which ones might be detrimental to your health, and we can tell this is good or this is bad for you. And here is a summary. So again, do read through this. It just explains about food ingredients. Now there are a number of good and bad substances in food that we're evaluating here. So if you check this page here, total fat. A lot of fat is generally bad for people. But for some people it's moderately bad, and for some it's extremely bad because of genetic variations. They just respond to it more, and they have more negative health effects from it. So do check where your arrow is. In this case it's very unfavorable. Saturated fatty acids, that's the unhealthy type of fat, so unfavorable. Cholesterol, also unfavorable in this case. Total sugar, so lots of sugar and high calories from sugars is also bad for this person. Glycemic index is not so bad. Glycemic index is how fast the sugar goes into your bloodstream, and it might increase it a lot or a lot and very quickly, so it spikes, which is bad for some metabolic problems, and should be avoided for some genetic types, and it's not so much of a problem for some other genetic types. So having a high glycemic index is not so much of a problem here. It might be much worse for you. Sodium, that's table salt. For some people it's normal, for others it's very unhealthy. The amino acids cysteine and methionine, in this case, are very unfavorable, might be different again in your case. Then phosphorus, which is in chocolate and in meat products, sausages and so on, is moderately unfavorable. Arachidonic acid, This is something in animal products. It increases the inflammation response of the body, is moderately bad. It might be very bad for you or normal. Alpha-linoleic acid and EPA, they are omega-3 fatty acids. They are for some people favorable, for some medium, and for some unfavorable. So it's unfavorable in this case. And alcohol is very unfavorable. Coffee, favorable in this case. It can have a protective effect as well. It has a lot of antioxidants, so for some people it's good. And purines again is moderately unfavorable. Now this is just some background information. These are the typical substances in food that are bad for you. Very bad for some, moderately bad for others, and some of them are good for you. And then there are also the micronutrients, the vitamins, the minerals, and so on. And through your genetics, we can find out how your body responds to many of these vitamins and minerals, and what dosage we would recommend based on your genetics in order to ensure that everything is working all right. You remember the GPX1 gene, it needs more selenium. So we would recommend more selenium in your diet if you have the genetic variation, and normal amounts if you don't. So here again is information about micronutrients, and here you see some scales, and you see your requirement of vitamin A. So it's actually quite high in this case. Vitamin B6 is moderate, vitamin C is a little higher, vitamin E is same, calcium is lower, iron is quite low, and so on. So all of these vitamins and minerals that are contained within food and different food types are evaluated here. And we can tell you which amount we would recommend based on your genetics. Also coenzyme Q10, which we've talked about, it works in this case, that's why some of it is recommended, and omega-3 fatty acids in this case would not be recommended, but phytosterols, which is an alternative, is recommended. So this here, this table, shows you the recommended daily allowance. Now there are some agencies that try to make recommendations that are applicable to everyone, men and women, children, babies, and they said a person should eat 200 micrograms of folic acid, applicable to everybody, and calcium 800 milligrams, and so on. So they did their best to try to find out what is the general healthy nutrition, and they did a good job in this respect. But only through looking at genetics we can see individual differences. And that is why your actual requirement, based on our recommendation, based on your genetics, is deviating from the normal amount. So here you see omega-3 fatty acids, we would actually, in this case, not recommend them because they have a negative effect in some respects. And we would recommend phytosterols instead, and so on. So you will find your requirement actually will differ from the actual requirement. And the best effect, the best way to cover your requirement is to optimize your nutrition. So getting micronutrients from nutrition is always the best approach. So this is what the program is supposed to do. It is trying to find out how much you need, which type of foods should you eat to cover these requirements, and then you should follow the list and eat the stuff that is recommended and avoid the ones that we don't recommend, and that will then help you to get the right nutrition. And here you see some scientific references that this is built on. Everything is very strongly scientifically based because we're a medical laboratory. We do work with medical genetic standards, so every claim that we make must have a number of scientific studies supporting the same thing. So here you see the scientific studies. In case you're interested, it's heavy reading. You might need a degree in genetics or medicine to understand some of it, but in case you're interested, you can look them up on the internet and find those publications. Now, the best way to cover your micronutrient and mineral needs is, of course, a healthy nutrition. And this is what this program is meant to help you with, to make sure you eat the right food and cover the right nutrient amounts. So you're in the best way of using this program to make sure you get the right nutrients. However, if you think that you're not following the program enough, or that you maybe could do more to make sure that you get the right nutrients, there is the option of a personalized supplement. And this looks like this. This is one of these bottles, and it's called Nutri-Me Nutrition. And the concept works like this. If I open it, it's a bit difficult to show on camera, but it consists of a lot of different small pellets, small vesicles. And we have around 20 different of these pellets, and each one of them contains a certain vitamin. So there's one for vitamin C, one for vitamin E, one for vitamin A, and so on. And what we do is we do know your requirement for the different vitamins, and we take this information and then we mix the different pellets at different amounts, in different concentrations. And then all you do is every morning you take a spoon. For me, as I said, I have a high risk of Alzheimer's disease. I need a lot of antioxidants. So I need 8 milliliters, which is exactly this amount. I do this in the mornings. I take them and put them in my mouth, drink a glass of water, and they're gone. And they have a number of advantages as compared to gelatin capsules, for example. For example, calcium and zinc. These two substances, they use the same process of how to be absorbed. So they're kind of channels, you could say little doors from the intestine into the bloodstream. And if you mix calcium and zinc as powders, one of them is going to go through and be absorbed and block the doors, and the other one is not going to be absorbed. That's a general problem. So do look out if ever you see a multimineral substance which has both in it, because bioavailability is very bad in this case. So the advantage here is that these pellets, these small vesicles, contain one substance only. So in one position of the intestine, you're going to release calcium, and in another position, there's going to be a different pellet, you're going to release zinc. So both are absorbed. Then these are slow release. It means over the course of 8 hours, you're going to gradually absorb the vitamins. And this is also very important because vitamin C, for example, has a half-life of half an hour, of 30 minutes, which means if I take 100 milligrams of vitamin C and it reaches my bloodstream, 30 minutes later, half of it is already gone. Another 30 minutes later, half of what remains is gone, so I have a quarter. So especially in the case of vitamin C and antioxidants that our body should have at all times, so that whenever a free radical is created, that we immediately neutralize it. All of these are better in a slow release concept. So this is slow release. It gives your body energy the whole throughout the day, not energy, the nutrients. And I personally would also recommend not to take it at night because it contains vitamin C, and for some people, me especially, vitamin C has a invigorating effect, so it wakes you up and you might have problems sleeping. So do take it in the mornings or at lunchtime, and I wouldn't take it too late at night before going to sleep. But then again, you can try it and decide yourself. And this is here on the bottle you will have your name. This is personally produced for you, and here you will see lots of little scale bars to see how much of each substance is in there. And just to give you an idea, we're testing more than 50 genes. There are more than 700 trillion different result possibilities. So this is as unique and personalized as it gets. 700 trillion different mixtures. It's not that we have 3 different ones and you ship the best match, but everyone is produced specifically for you. And the best thing is, since this is really the nutrients your body requires to keep running, to keep staying healthy, it is recommended to take once per day, preferably for the rest of your life. We do take into account different seasons, because in winter you do need a little more vitamin D because your body doesn't produce as much through sunlight. Also in different countries it's a different question. We do take into account increasing age, so whenever you order it, it's re-evaluated. We also take into account new science when we find out, oh, it might be better with this genetic variation to actually increase this a bit more. It flows into it. So every time you reorder, we re-evaluate it and you get the newest stage of science, and it ensures that you get the right nutrients. And in order to order this, we have a website That's the DNAnutriControl.com website, and there you need to enter a recipe code because, as you remember, this is unique based on your genes. So in the report you're going to find this recipe code. This is how it looks. And you're going to, it's unfortunately quite a long code, but there's a lot of information. You're going to have to integrate this information, enter this information into the form. And this contains, encoded, the information that we need to create this mix for you. So you order it, then you enter the recipe code, we create it, and then we ship it to you. And you can just try it for 3 months, or you can go for 12 months, and so on. So this is the option of how to order this as an additional supplement in case you want to make sure that you get the right nutrients in addition to the right nutrition. Okay, now let's talk about the food table, which is probably the most important or most interesting part of your genetic test. This genetic test is modular, so you have the chance to say, I just want to lose weight, or I just want to know what is healthy for me, or both of it together. So depending on which genetic test that you've ordered, you might see a slightly different type of food table here. In this example, both of the things were ordered, so I can explain all of the aspects of the table. So don't worry if you sometimes see a question mark instead of a result here. That's just because this part was not ordered and has not been genetically tested. All right, so now let's look at the food table. I'm going to jump over this. You can read up on it in case you're interested. I'm going to explain it on the live table. So let me just find a good page. Let's go for this one and zoom in. So first of all, here you have different categories: baked goods, cakes, and confectionery. So here are the different types of food that all belong in this category. And for one thing, what is important for the weight management aspect, in case you have ordered this, you will see these bars here. And these bars and these numbers will likely be different for you because it's based on your genes. They're all personalized. So what we find here is that apple strudel is as I've explained, something that has less weight gaining potential than waffles would do. So what the person can eat 60 grams of apple strudel to have the same weight gain effect as 15 grams of waffles. So what does this tell you? It tells you eat more apple strudel and less waffles if you have the choice. Both taste maybe the same to you, then you can choose the ones that are better for your genes. Some people say, looking at these gram numbers is too complicated. They just say, I only eat things in the green area and I avoid the ones in red. Or they might say red only on Sundays, otherwise just green food. There's a very easy way to adapt your nutrition. It has the benefit of teaching you what type of food is good for you and you like, and which ones you should avoid. So this is for the weight management aspect. So go for more of the green stuff and less of the red stuff. Also for the weight management stuff, when you look through your table, you will have found something that looks like this. Any amount, no item. This means that the calories contained within this food are so insignificant, so small, that it doesn't really matter how much you eat of it. This means in case you're ever hungry and you don't have any more food to eat because you've used up all of your items, then you can just look out for these and eat as much as you want. So for different categories, in some cases you're going to see this quite a lot. So here, for example, all different types of salad and so on. So any amount, no item is a good intermediate snack in case you don't want to gain weight. Now this here shows you the main calorie containing substances. So for example, going for spinach. Spinach, generally a general portion of spinach is 150 grams. And 150 grams of spinach contain 29 kilocalories, so very low amount. That's why it's also a no item. Any amount, you can eat that whenever in between. So 29 kilocalories, 4 grams of protein, 1 gram of carbohydrates, and 0 grams of fat. So these are the important calorie-containing substances. So just in case you're interested. And if you're not, as long as you just look at these bars, that's sufficient for your weight loss program. Okay, in case you have an allergy and you gave us this information at the time of ordering the report, things like nut allergy, you would see a warning in this area here. So it says allergy, and it might show a warning sign. This just means this type of food might contain or is likely to contain the substance that you have told us you are allergic to. We don't find out any allergies from genetics. The genetics of allergy is just not understood enough, and we don't know how to determine if you are going to be allergic to something based on a genetic test. So we're limited with the possibilities here. But if you knew that you're not allergic, then we could enter this information and it will give you a warning. It does not mean this is a foolproof list. It just means it's supposed to help you decide and warn you, be careful, it might be that there is something that you're allergic to. It's ultimately your responsibility to check every type of food if they contain if it contains the allergens that you should avoid. So it's just a help, but don't depend on it too much. Then that's the weight management aspect. Now for the healthy food aspect, this part here is more important. So in the first aspect, we look at how much fat, carbohydrates does this contain, and what is the weight gain potential for you. And here we look at from all of the ingredients that the food has. Some of them might be good for you based on your genes, some of them might be bad for you based on your genes, and if there's more good stuff in it, it's going to be more recommended. If it's got more bad stuff in it, it's going to be less recommended to you. And the mode of recommendation is with smiley faces, so it's very easy to understand. 6 happy smiley faces is the best you can have. It just means that vegetable mix in general is very healthy for you. It contains a lot of vitamins, minerals that you require in a higher amount based on your genetics, and it contains very few problems, very few substances that are a problem for your health. 1 smiley face is less healthy than 6 smiley faces. Then there are neutral faces, these black ones, iceberg lettuce, for example. It means it contains some negative stuff, but also some good stuff, and they kind of balance each other out, so it's neither good nor bad for you to eat this. And then there is 1 red smiley face. That means more bad stuff in it than good things, and it goes up to 7 unhappy faces. So, for example, some beans might be very healthy, but chickpeas are very unhealthy due to some substances that they contain more. Soybeans are not so good, green peas are better. So there are really big differences from the same category of food based on more than 40 different ingredients or components that this food is made of. And over here, you can see the components. So this is just the most important ones, but things like glycemic index, how much lactose is included, how much calcium, how much iron, how much zinc, and so on. So different vitamins and so on. And we look at all of these aspects. We look at your genes. We say you have a high risk of a certain metabolic problem. To counteract this, you need a lot of folic acid. How much folic acid is in this type of food? Is there anything else that might be bad? And this way we evaluate every one of these types of food independently by looking at all of it together. It's not just saying fruit is healthy, so eat fruit. It's just too simple. All right, and if we look at this table in a bit more detail, you see that some numbers are green, some are black, and some are red. Now, these numbers are the same for everyone, so they are not personalized to your genes. It just means that red means it's a bad substance, so sodium, for example. So this type of food contains a lot of sodium, more than others, that's why it's red. So the ones that contain most are red, if it's bad, and the ones that contain most of something good are green. So any green number means this is particularly rich in folic acid, and this is particularly rich in sodium. It might help you to get a little insight into why something might be less healthy or more healthy for you. However, as I said, it's a very complicated thing. Every one of these types of food has at least 500 different calculations being done and different factors being considered, and overall if it's beneficial or bad for you is considered in this. So this is for people that are really interested in how much of each of these substances is contained within, but you don't need to know the deeper workings of how it works. For you to use it, really just eat more of the green smileys, eat less of the red smileys, and the unhappy faces. And sometimes you might even see in meat, all of it is bad, but some of it has six red smileys, unhappy faces, and some of it has 2. So you should just prefer the ones with less unhappy faces. And you should generally eat less of the stuff that is red and more of the stuff that is green. It doesn't mean you can never eat anything with red, but make it an exception rather than the rule. And for weight management, as I said, just look at the bars, maybe use the grams per item. It might be ounces per item depending on where you're located. And here is one more aspect. You see lactose and gluten as well as caution. And this means if, for example, you are genetically predisposed to be lactose intolerant, then it doesn't mean you are lactose intolerant, it just means you are likely to develop lactose intolerant symptoms at some point in your life. It also does not mean you should stop eating lactose containing milk products unless you have symptoms. So there's no need to stop eating them. It just means you might have a warning sign here sometimes. You can eat this type of food, but if you ever get a bad reaction, remember, check out if you have a warning here. If yes, then it's likely that you have developed a food intolerance that you had a genetic predisposition to. The same goes for gluten. So you can continue eating it if there's a warning sign, but if you realize you have a bad reaction, then avoid everything with the warning. It's as simple as that. This will help you deal with lactose intolerance and gluten intolerance in a very simple way. It's similar with the caution. So if you have a caution sign in here, it just means you can eat this type of food, but it might at some point cause problems. So just look out for it, and if you ever get a bad reaction, avoid everything that has a caution sign. It's as simple as that. So it really helps you avoid any type of food that is bad for you or that might cause digestive problems. All right, and this here at the end is quite technical. In case you're interested, otherwise you can skip this last part. This is just some information about our certifications. Now, what sets us apart from many other suppliers of genetic testing is that we have our own in-house laboratory. So we run our own laboratory, our own processes, and we put a very high focus on high quality documentation, high certifications. So we have lots of external bodies coming in and auditing us, auditing our data protection system, auditing our quality management system, and so on. And we also want to have control over the turnaround times as well as a very high level of automation. If you're interested, there are videos on the internet showing the level of automation, that all of our processes are done by robots and machines to avoid human errors and improve throughput. But here I'm just quickly going to walk you through the certifications that we have in our laboratory. So for one thing, this here is from the Austrian state. And many countries have genetic testing laws, which are meant to protect consumers from discrimination against genetics and so on. And they are in a different form in different countries. And as far as I'm aware, Austria in Europe has the the most strict genetic testing laws that I'm aware of. So we have the license to perform medical genetic testing issued by the Austrian government. So they came, they audited the laboratory, they do this in regular cases, and it's a very, very strict process of obtaining this license to perform medical genetic tests. So this is the first certification that we have. Then in addition, this will be compulsory to have a laboratory in Austria. It's also a quality sign compared to other countries where you could do it without any kind of certification. So this is one of the steps. Then the optional certification, the ISO 15189 certification, is the highest level of quality certification you can have for a medical laboratory. So it looks at quality control, checking for errors, validation of all processes and so on. And this certification applies to lifestyle analyses for weight management and healthy nutrition, as well as for medical interpretation and genetic analysis. And the company and office is ISO 9001 certified. This is all about document control, continual improvement, and so on. Then some of the medical genetic analyses are covered not by 15189, but by ISO 17025. It's similar to the ISO 15189, but yet again slightly different. So all processes are highly certified, audited not only by us, by our own quality management team, but also by some of the companies we supply, as well as government bodies and official certification institutions. And this here just shows the technical details. So your order number, date of birth, the analyzing laboratory address. It shows my signature again for releasing your genetic results, because every genetic result needs to be looked at by 3 people, 2 different scientists that analyze the results, and then we compare if they both had the same conclusion. If yes, we can go ahead, and then my signature as laboratory head to release the results for shipping. And then some other information of when the analysis times have been performed. All right, and this is the end of this counseling session. I hope you found it interesting, and I hope I cleared up any misunderstandings that you might have had. I did my best to explain everything. Do read through the booklet again. It will repeat a lot of the things that I've said, and I think it will make some things more clear. The ones that are scientifically very interested will find enough basis for research into the science behind the whole program. And I hope we made it very transparent on what scientific studies everything is based on, and that I've convinced you of the scientific basis of this program. I hope I have also given you a number of different options of how to use this program to your liking. Some people want to do it online, some people want to do it on paper, some people want to do it easy, others want the flexibility. So I think you've seen that you have lots of different options of how to use this program. And I think there's not much left to say. In case you do have questions, do contact us. We'll do our best to answer those questions, and also try to improve the text in the reports to make sure that future customers do understand it correctly. So please do get back to us. We like positive as well as negative feedback to improve our system in the future. And there's nothing left for me to say other than to wish you a lot of success with your NutriGenetic program.